Welcome to the Autonomic Healing Podcast. I'm Tom Pells.
And I'm Ruth Lawrenson. We'll be unpacking what it looks like to activate your brain to holistically manage stress and trauma that bring healing to the mind, body, and spirit.
Being free to live authentically as humans.
Thank you for joining us. Let's get this conversation started.
Here we are, Tom. Our third part of our Rational Intimacy mini-series. And if you're joining us for the first time, we've been looking at rational intimacy, this healthy alternative to the tsunami of stress. And we just encourage you to go back if you can and catch up on previous episodes. It'll really help you figure out what we're actually talking about today. But in this last episode that we launched, Tom, we looked at how rational intimacy, it hinges itself on this understanding of what's beneficial and what's detrimental. But today, what we're going to be looking at and unpacking is that this other key part of it, it's a key determining factor for living out rational intimacy and staying out of the tsunami of stress.
Yeah.
And it's the difference between reaction and response. Could you I'm going to throw it over to you, but I'm just so intrigued by this, the difference between reaction and response. Could you just start us? I mean, some people might not even be like, well, what is the difference,
Yeah.
you know?
Reaction versus response is what determines whether we experience the tsunami of stress or rational intimacy. It is that pivotal.
Wow. Yeah.
We often use the terms reaction and response as if they mean the same thing, but they are in reality very different. And responses versus reaction produce very different results. Either with a reaction, an escalating tsunami of flight or fight, when we are having a reaction, or a deepening experience of growth and healthy intimacy when we are choosing to have a response. And this is where the nerdy history and learning Tom can make a contribution.
I love the nerdy history and nerdy Tom. Come on, bring it.
Well, this is when I can make a contribution in contrast to the adventuring mountain climber and traveler. So, reaction. The history of that, the etymology of that, goes back into the Latin reactio. It's almost magical, like reactio. But
like Harry Potter.
Yes, exactly. Reactio and healthy intimacy. No, doesn't happen.
Doesn't work.
That's what...
It's not magic.
Probably some evil mage or something would be saying, reactio. And it literally means done again. And in contrast to response, which is from responsum, which is something offered in return. So reaction, done again. Response, something offered in return. Those are very different. So reaction and response, where we might think they're the same thing, those are very different.
Yeah.
And we can change with a reaction. We can change the faces and change the places, but it's still the same experience. I've done this before. Done again. That's what a reaction is. I had this experience before. That was what I experienced. That was what was done. That was what I did. And now I'm doing it again. That's a reaction.
So that's very much what we talked about in the tsunami of stress. So there's this reaction that happens with this perceived threat, right? And so it is that whole... It doesn't really matter what's actually real in front of you. There's this kind of, the reaction is, this was done before, so therefore now I'm automatically reacting.
Yes.
Right?
And that's what a reaction is. The stress and need gets triggered by a sensed or perceived threat to well-being.
Yeah.
Real or not. And what happened before is done again. I'm having a reaction, which is completely understandable. and frankly predictable and consistent, and then the result inevitably is a sense of distress and discontent and a negative anticipation. Something bad is going to happen. Why? Because something bad happened before, so something bad is going to happen again. Something is done again. I'm having a reaction. Or the alternative is to choose to have a response, because a response is something offered in return. So rather than having a reaction to what has happened, someone has said something, someone has done something, we have a reaction to it.
Yeah.
Instead, we can offer something in return.
That's pretty amazing.
It's relational.
Isn't it? Yeah.
Yes.
I love the difference there. I mean, I've never really thought of it in that, going back to the actual meanings of it. It's very striking.
So in other words, rather than simply allowing ourselves to react to the sensed or perceived threat to well-being, we can choose to pause just for a moment and respond to the threat, to offer something beneficial in return. If we don't choose to respond, then we will react.
Yeah. And when I think of just life and just like my own life, or, just life all around us, they're so full of reaction.
Oh.
And, this idea of actually, if we, I love what you said, if we just pause, we all have the power within us to choose a different way, to respond rather than react. Okay, can we earth this a little bit? Like, what are some, give us some examples of this, how does this play out in real life? The difference.
Yeah. Now, this may sound familiar to some. No, of course, this sounds familiar to everybody. You're running late, and the traffic is a mess. And people just don't seem to be interested in getting anywhere as quickly as you need to, and you need them to. Or at least get out of my way so I can get there. And you have a growing sense of that negative anticipation that is characteristic of distress and discontent in the tsunami. You are not a happy driver, and things are not going well. So you approach an opportunity to change lanes. And to get ahead of it. But the driver in the other lane chooses that moment to speed up.
Of course.
And the car ahead of you chooses that moment to slow down. And probably because the car ahead is slowing down, but that doesn't matter because you're not thinking beyond your lane and your moment. A reaction would be to get stressed about not being able to move faster. Honk, or something more impolite. Look for a way to get into the other lane even though cars could collide, or it forces someone to swerve or brake. And then that distress and discontent escalates into evasion and avoidance of your own and the other driver's well-being. Physical, emotional, and relational. Then the resistance, defiance, anger, and not assertiveness happens. Probably aggressive response begins to develop. And maybe the internal dialogue with some nasty thoughts about the other drivers and how you're going to be late and look bad, or the state of the nation as a whole, which can seem like it's just going into the toilet. Or a response. Pausing to realize that what you can offer in return is to realize everyone is in the same situation. Does it really matter if you're late? Is the earth going to stop? Is life and civilization as we know it going to end? What can you contribute positively to the situation? See, that's a response. What can I offer in return to these other drivers, to myself, to this situation?
Yeah.
Yes. Maybe let someone in who is even trying to change lanes. I've often thought I would rather have a really aggressive driver in front of me where I can see what they're doing rather than behind me and wondering what are they going to do. A response would be a courteous drive. and helps someone have a better experience on the road. In other words, rational intimacy. Having a sense of contentment. Satisfaction doesn't necessarily mean happiness with the traffic conditions. And then grace, that second stage, emotional poise and gifting. See, a response, rational intimacy, a reaction, the tsunami takes off.
I love hearing that example. I can completely relate. So just so you're not on your own, Tom.
Oh, I've never been in a situation
I'm
like that.
sure you've never been the person, right? Just circumstantial. Anyway, but I'm just curious how, so we've got this again, this choice that can happen. We can either react, and I think most of us would feel the familiar territory is reacting.
Oh, absolutely.
Right?
Of course.
We're just like reacting, and even my kids will say to me, "Mum, you're reacting." And so it's part of our language and part of the way our behaviour, I think, with one another. And then there's this better alternative, which is to respond. But I'm curious, how do you change? Well, for starters, how can you know when you're in reaction mode as opposed to response mode? Because if we can't actually identify, if we're not even seeing it,
right,
then we can't, there's no hope for us to change. So is there a way in which you can kind of identify, oh, actually I'm reacting right now, I need to pivot somehow and take that pause and go into reaction? Is there a way?
And the key is to assess the emotions you're feeling. And this is really going to come up much more strongly and be more pronounced when we get into episodes on cognitive homeostasis and problem solving.
Yeah.
Because as human beings, we are oriented, because of stress, trauma, modeling, all sorts of things, to what I call seemingly rational perceptions. And I've talked about that in prior episodes. And so this is really very much related to my perception of myself, others, and the situation I'm in. And the key to the difference between having a reaction versus a response is to assess what you are feeling. Not to think your way through it, because that just may be this escalation of seemingly rational perceptions.
Yeah.
But to assess the emotions you're feeling. What am I feeling? And is that healthy or unhealthy? See, we usually think in terms of like and don't like. What am I feeling? I like that feeling. What am I feeling? I don't like that feeling. And we're very oriented toward like and don't like whatever emotions we're experiencing. And reactions are all about like and don't like what I'm feeling. You're in the traffic, you don't like what you're feeling, and there's a reaction. So
for example,
that is so critical.
Yeah.
That healthy or unhealthy.
That's really helpful for me, because it's actually in the swirl, right? Because there is something where your temperature's up, right?
Stress
if
and need are happening.
If you're responding, you're in that traffic, your temperature gauge, not in the car, but in your body has gone up, or in your emotions has gone up. And so when you're actually thinking, oh, that so-and-so in front of me, just even that feeling, the anger, where is this anger coming from? I'm having a normal day, I just happen to be hitting traffic, and now I'm super angry. So just the identification of this, hang on a minute, there's this unhealthy emotion that's come from left field via this circumstantial traffic jam that I'm in. So that is your indicator in that moment, to be actually I'm reacting.
Yes.
Is that right?
I don't even have to figure out why.
Yep.
I don't have to know when have I been in this experience before or anything like that. Just what am I feeling? And is that healthy or unhealthy? Rather than like or don't like.
And in some ways, the healthy and unhealthy, it goes back to a little bit of the beneficial detrimental, right? Because
Absolutely.
it's not about what it feels. It's not about, obviously, like anger, I think is one of the more obvious unhealthy indicators.
Yes. And by the way, bear in mind that with the tsunami, you've already passed 3 stages in the tsunami before you've hit an anger.
Yeah.
When you get the anger, you're already 4 stages into the tsunami of stress. Stress and need, distress, discontent, avoidance and evasion, not dealing with things, not thinking about things, not present. And that's when the resistance, defiance, anger, and not being assertive hits. We're already deep into the tsunami by the time we're recognizing anger. This allows us to sense that progression, because right at the very beginning, we experience a sense of stress and need, which we may experience in rational intimacy too. There is stress and need. It's just a sense of contentment and healthy emotions, as opposed to the unhealthy emotions that often accompany stress and need.
But I think what's important, what's been important for me is to actually understand what's healthy and what's unhealthy.
Oh, yes.
So, for example, like with anger, I guess it's like what I think when I think about anger, I think, well, that's obviously unhealthy. But I think you can have things that feel good, even like angry feelings that make you feel justified.
Very gratifying.
Like, actually, I'm right. Or so the feeling isn't, it's about the impact of that feeling. Yes. It's the indicator as to whether it's healthy or unhealthy.
Yes. And is it having a beneficial impact or a detrimental impact in reality, not in your own mind?
Yes. And I think that's a compass for us that's so helpful, because I think, like you say, some unhealthy feelings are going to be really obvious. Like, I know I'm jealous. I know that is unhealthy. Yeah. Deep down, most of us know some of those things, right?
Yeah.
But there's these other emotions that almost like, they're complex. They could feel good even though they're unhealthy. And so to be able to go, actually, hang on a minute, let's override what it feels like right now and think about impact. Is it beneficial or detrimental? That will help us figure out whether it's something is healthy or unhealthy. And then in that moment, to choose response rather than reaction.
Have a reaction.
Yeah.
We choose a response, we have a reaction. And related to emotions, it's helpful to begin to expand our emotional vocabularies. For many people, it's mad, bad, sad, and glad. And that's the range of expressing their emotions. I'm mad. How are you feeling? I'm sad. I'm feeling glad. Mad, bad, sad, or glad. And I just feel bad. Okay, but there's lots more than that.
In between, yeah.
Absolutely. And so that can be a real help. But there's also, along with that, expanding our emotional vocabulary, there's also a sense of being able to, how do I put this? To sort out, this feel good, or does this not feel good? And choosing not to let that determine a course ahead. So, for example, with healthy and unhealthy, there are all sorts of emotions that are healthy, and we don't like them.
Yeah.
Show of hands for anyone who enjoys grieving. No.
Not at all. Yes.
Of course not. And the emotions that go with grief, we don't like them. But if we don't grieve losses, we don't heal.
Yeah.
Those are actually very healthy emotions. We just don't like them.
Yeah. I think that's so interesting. I feel like we could have a whole episode on expanding the vocabulary of emotions.
Yes.
Because you're right. It's like, I think sometimes we don't even we don't know how to put words to, sometimes we don't even know how to identify our emotions, and we don't know how to put words to them. And then we don't know, we've been taught, I think, culturally to identify what's healthy and unhealthy by whether it feels good or feels bad. And
Absolutely.
that's the wrong way of doing it. And so, in our last episode, we really did that deep dive on beneficial, detrimental, and so helpful in terms of figuring out, because actually when we figure that out, then that's the indicator of when we can actually make that transition from reaction to response. Okay, so I'm just curious because you gave this funny example because I'm imagining you now on the freeway.
Oh, yeah.
But you gave us this funny example of driving, and in some ways it's like, well, what's the big deal? We're just getting frustrated at a drive. Or, these are some of the smaller moments in life. It could be driving.
That can turn into very big ones, though.
Exactly, and that's what I was going to bring up because there's these all everyday moments, whether it's driving or getting a coffee or something goes wrong out there in the big world. But then there's those are all connected really to some more of the bigger moments, more important moments relationally in our lives that can have huge consequences if we depending on whether we're reacting to them or responding to them. Could you just talk about that a little bit?
The small moments of life are just another experience of the big moments. It could be relationships and jobs, and there are small moments in both of those, but there are big moments in both of those, because the issue is the dynamics and our perception of what I like to call what's at stake.
Yeah.
The more we perceive or sense is at stake, the more likely we are to have a reaction. And whether that's in a small moment or in a big moment, the more we perceive or sense is at stake in that moment, big or small, the more likely we are to have a reaction, not a response.
Wow. I'm really surprised to hear that, because you would think that it would be opposite, right? Because you would think that, well, I guess that's because if we believe response is the best thing to do, because you would think that the higher the cost in a situation, the more likely we want to react, not react, but respond. So that's fascinating to me that we almost do the opposite.
Yes, because with a reaction, we're not thinking. We're just reacting.
So it's
and the reason we're reacting is because we sense there is so much at stake.
There's so much at stake, therefore we're going to overreact. Yeah.
Yep. And the more that is at stake, ironically, the more beneficial it is to have a response.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah. It's one of those ultimate ironies that if we were to have a response because there is so much at stake, and we're aware of that, it would be much more likely to have a beneficial outcome. But because of these seemingly rational perceptions, the more we sense is at stake, the more likely we are to simply have a reaction because there is so much at stake.
Yeah.
Yeah. Again, understanding reaction versus response is so critical to well-being. And with reactions, most of the time we are undermining our own sense of well-being, creating more at stake. But with a response, we're supporting our well-being and the well-being of others and mutual well-being.
Yes.
So reaction, reactio, do it again, experiencing it again, is to devalue the worth of our own well-being and the well-being of others. But to have a response, to offer something in return, is to have an exchange of something of value. And these can be in small moments, or they can be in huge moments. With the reaction to the drivers, we're devaluing the worth of safety and courtesy and respect for self and others. With a response, we allow ourselves to choose to value what really matters. Safety, respect, love, civility. The recent shooting, to take this at an entirely different level, the recent shooting at a supermarket, again, is an extreme reaction to the worth of people based on race, social issues, whatever is all in that, politics, all sorts of things. But that's inevitably rooted in sensed or perceived victimization that is being reacted to.
Yeah, wow.
I've seen that so many times. I was in forensic psychotherapy and still am as a career 20 years now. And inevitably there is sensed or perceived victimization that is being reacted to and not going to be a victim anymore.
Yeah.
And yet creating victims.
I mean, that's so true. And, you know, we're literally in the aftermath of Buffalo. But to think that, you know, and there's so much to unpack and try and change, you know, I think in this nation, I think the whole nation's again in lament over yet another horrifying display of reaction, of this, like you say, this huge level, generational level reaction to something that's not real.
And that in turn triggers other reactions to that. And rather than responding individually, corporately, rather than responding to the underlying issues and values, affirming human dignity, safety, well-being, there's reactions that just keep multiplying.
So in some ways, reactions have this ability to cause more reaction.
Inevitably do.
Yeah. Huh.
So
to stop that cycle is going to take people
choosing to respond
in rational intimacy.
Yes. Rather than this escalating pattern of the tsunami of stress, individually and corporately. Something closer to home, like feeling less than in a relationship. That what we want, who we are, we think doesn't matter because of the other person's reaction to us. Something that can't be talked about. It's just the repeated tsunami experience and fracturing of intimacy. In other words, a repeated experiencing of reactions triggering other reactions in a chain reaction where there's a meltdown and relationships become radioactive.
Yeah.
Instead, we can choose to have a response, to offer something in return that is beneficial to ourselves, others, and the situation.
That's so good.
There may be, and probably will be, pain in that. Because there was pain already present from the prior experience or experiences that is being reacted to. That's the point. But we can choose with a response. We're choosing what I call productive pain, instead of reacting out of unproductive pain and simply contributing even more unproductive pain. We get to choose productive pain, to encounter the pain in a beneficial way is the difference between a response and a reaction.
So in right at the heart of a reaction then is pain.
Inevitably.
And so what we're trying to do is actually get away from that pain, most likely, in our reaction.
Yes.
So the reaction is, in some ways, a unhealthy response to pain. Yeah?
Yep.
So I think by understanding that we can embrace pain.
Yes.
And we can see even some of the most painful parts of our story or the situations that we might even be faced with today, they can all be productive. That changes us into that space of being able to be a person that pauses, recognizes that we're possibly reacting.
Is that healthy or unhealthy?
And then thinks, what can I offer to this?
Yes. Yep. In many ways, whether that is navigating the lanes of traffic on a city street, or navigating the incidents of road rage, or navigating international boundaries between countries we see playing out in Europe, and the politics of all that, and the perceived national interests of all of that. Whether we're navigating the intersections of our relationships with ourselves and others, the dynamics are the same. Reactions or responses.
Yeah, Tom, I think this is the more and more we're talking about this, the more I realise how huge this is. Because I think what I've been seeing right now, just sensing really, is this like grief that's circulating society. I think I'm witnessing this all out low. That people I think there's this like a despair almost with the way we are relating together as humans. I think whether it's on, people are kind of face palming over the reactions that are coming on across social media, or whether it's, like you say, the war in Europe, or the shootings, or, there's all these big and small and intimate and distant ways that we're seeing humans relating to other human beings, and it's not working, and there's devastation everywhere, and I think everyone's fed up with it, honestly. And so I think what this is,
they're not able to cope.
No.
And then the reactions are manifestations of the sensed inability to cope.
Yeah, but I think deep down, wired into our human DNA is a longing, a desire for things to be different.
Yes.
And for us to relate in a way that is loving and beneficial to one another.
Yes.
And so I think the reason why I'm saying all that is that actually, it seems so simple, 2 words, the difference of 2 words, right? But it's so different.
It is.
If we could see some pockets of people, starting to operate, starting to
choosing to respond, rather than to just continue to react.
Yeah.
There is an increasing desperation in relationships that I'm sensing, that's fueled by stress and trauma that has not been normalized, and it's just continuing to be compounded. And the reason why autonomic healing activation in body, mind, and spirit can be so transformational is because homeostasis, normalizing the impact of stress and trauma that has fueled reactions that harm ourselves and others, is what allows us to have a response rather than be had by a reaction when something in the present triggers something in the past. As I say, that was then is now, and we have a reaction. Or, that was then, this is now with homeostasis, and we can choose to have a response. Now, will we or won't we? Even if we do have a reaction, we can then choose a response.
Yeah.
And offer something to ourselves. So, with homeostasis, we can respond out of resilience to change and thrive, not react simply out of a survival instinct, which ironically jeopardizes survival. That's the irony in a reaction, is that inevitably and invariably, it is about a survival instinct. And yet reactions compromise survival. Not just individually, but collectively. And it doesn't have to be that way. We each get to choose. Am I going to have a reaction? or will I have a response? Will I react and this is done again? Or a response and I'm offering something in return that is beneficial to myself, to others, to the situation?
Such a challenge, but a hopeful one, you know? And I think as we continue to pursue autonomic healing, because this is about healing.
It is.
This is about healing, first, just some of the stress and trauma for our own lives, but ultimately to see some healing in community. I mean, that's what we're after, right?
Yeah.
So to pursue that and to like focus on these two words, simple words, but such different approaches to be a person who reacts or responds.
And entirely different outcomes.
And entirely different outcomes.
Yeah. That
leads us into this place, this paradigm that we like to call rational intimacy.
Indeed. You've been listening to the Autonomic Healing Podcast.
Join us next time as we continue in our conversations with Tom. If you're interested in pursuing your own autonomic healing journey and want to find a practitioner, visit our website, innerworkings.org. See you at the next episode.